Thank you, everybody, and a warm welcome to Cambridge County Council's Children and Young People's Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures or share on social media during the meeting. Please, though, can everyone present turn their phones to silent or vibrate and their laptops with the annoying "you've got an email" noise off while the meeting is taking place. We have no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll leave the room by the side doors and use the external fire exit to the assembly point in the car park. I'd remind everyone present that this meeting will be live streamed and a recording will be placed on the council's website. The meeting will be adjourned every 2 hours for a short comfort break. Before we begin this afternoon's business, I'd like to welcome Anthea Kenner, who joins us today to represent the Church of England Diocese of Ely. Although I know Anthea won't be a permanent diocesan representative, we do need to formally co-opt her in order for her to take a full part in today's proceedings. Welcome, Anthea, but please may I ask you to leave the room? Thank you, so that we can vote on the co-option of Anthea to the committee. I'm sure she's just outside the door. Are committee members content to co-opt Anthea Kenner as the Church of England diocesan representative in accordance with statutory requirements? Marvellous. Thanks, Sophie. Aye. Welcome. It was like you were just here. Michelle, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was important the Chair introduced the meeting, so we can now move to item 1, which is the notification of Chair and Vice Chair. This is a constitutional requirement, but the Chair and Vice Chair were appointed at full council on the 21st of May for this municipal year.
Thank you, Michelle. Item two is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Services Manager report any apologies, please?
We have apologies from Councillor Ambrose Smith and Councillor Costello is substituting, and apologies from Councillor Simone Taylor and Councillor Sanderson is substituting. I haven't got any other apologies.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Sharp.
Can I give apologies from Councillor Mark Goldsack? He wanted me to tell people why. He rang me this morning. His daughter is having a caesarean section operation this afternoon, so him and his wife are obviously at the hospital, and he felt that that was where his family needed him rather than here. But
absolutely understand that one, and hope everything goes well, and congratulations soon in order. Anything else, anyone? Welcome to Councillor Costello and Councillor Sanderson. I'm sure you will have fun this afternoon. Next, any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest this afternoon? Nope. Feel free to let us know if anything comes up. So moving on to the minutes of the 12th of March, we're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 12th of March as an accurate record. Does everyone agree? Does anyone have any points of clarification? Nope. I'll take those as approved, in which case the updated minutes action log was included in the published papers. Do we have any questions on the action log? Nope, we'll take that as noted as well. Next is petitions and public questions. We have no petitions this month, but we do have 2 public questions. So our first public question is from Mrs. Jean Salgi, I think. I hope I've said that correctly. Thank you. Ms. Salgi is a local resident and has a question for us. You have up to 3 minutes to address the committee. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. There is growing evidence that smartphone and social media use amongst children and teenagers is associated with high rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide, as well as decreased physical health through lack of outdoor play. There are safeguarding issues through grooming of young people, bullying, and exposure to traumatizing and violent pornography. In response to this new evidence, a large and active grassroots campaign movement has sprung up, with 110,000 members joining in the UK since it began in February of this year. We recently asked nearly 300 Cambridgeshire parents, if no other child in your child's class had a smartphone, at what age would you like to delay giving them one? Over 50% said they'd like to delay until the age of 16, and over 85% said not before the age of 14. However, currently 97% of 12-year-olds in the UK have smartphones, making it difficult for individual parents to make this choice. For this reason, this problem can't be solved by parents alone. There's already been action on this movement, with schools in St Albans and South London asking parents to delay giving their children smartphone till the age of 14, and governments in France and Spain taking action on this issue. So my question is, what is Cambridgeshire County Council doing to address this issue? At the very least, we'd like smartphones to be banned in all schools during the school day. We would also like there to be messaging and public health campaigns led by national government, local government and schools, outlining the public health and safeguarding risks and encouraging parents to delay access to smartphones before the age of 14 and to social media platforms before the age of 16. So I'd really love to know what this committee is thinking about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. In order that we can give you a full response, and obviously, thank you for all the research and the work that you're doing into this area, we will be providing you with a written response, which comes within 10 days. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
We do have a second question, but unfortunately, Mr. Jim Boyle, a local resident, is unable to join with us this afternoon. So I think, Michelle, you're able to read out his question. Thank you.
This is the question from Mr. Boyle. St Neots Free School was approved by the DFE in April 2017 in response to failing educational standards in St Neots. A third secondary school in St Neots was deemed necessary not to increase capacity but to improve educational outcomes and to provide St Neots parents with a choice. The case for a third secondary school in St Neots to provide quality and choice is arguably stronger now than it was then. With little cooperation from planning authorities, the project struggled to find a suitable site, and with the turmoil surrounding the existing schools, the project was placed on pause for a number of years. The project came close to being cancelled, but after much lobbying from residents, St Neots was given a second chance in March 2021, when the DFE wrote to the LEA advising that the school would be going ahead. However, in March of this year, Advantage Schools issued a press release announcing that they are now working with Bedfordshire County Council to open a new 4 FE secondary school in Bedford. This is St Neots Free School. After 7 years of trying to open the school in St Neots, it will now be built in Bedford instead. This is a kick in the teeth for young people in St Neots and their parents. I believe a site was identified in St Neots, but was too close to one of the existing schools and therefore did not meet the DFE requirements. The failure to find an acceptable site for this school, again, leaves a 12 million hole in the LEA's finances. This money was removed from the capital budget in 2021 on the assumption that the free school would provide the extra capacity needed in the long term. There has been no public announcement about any of this. St Neots parents have been kept in the dark. If our county councillors have been notified, they have kept it to themselves. I should be grateful if the Children and Young People's Committee would provide an update and advise how the LEA plans to meet its statutory obligation to provide secondary school places in the coming years.
Thank you. We will produce a written response for that question too, and they will be circulated with the meeting's minutes. Thank you, Mrs. Rowe. Item 5. Item 5 is the Children in Care Residential Strategy. This report will be introduced by Lucy Munt, who is the Head of Children's Commissioning. Thank you, Lucy.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk to you about our Children in Care Residential Strategy update, which I believe initially came to committee June of last year. So it's to provide an update on where we are. Can I ask if you've got any questions on the paper?
Anybody have any thoughts or questions on the paper? I'm sure we've all read and digested it. Councillor Slatter, please.
Sorry. Yes, the note I had, I can see the sense of this, and thank you very much for a clear report. It just occurred to me, having had such a home in Trumpington that was then closed. I wasn't on the council at the time, and I don't know what the setup was there, but I do remember that even if another organisation was running it, the county councillor was still held responsible by the residents for what was going on. So I would like a clear explanation of just how it will be explained to local residents particularly, and how both they and the local councillor will be involved in dealing with some day-to-day issues without becoming without getting into interference operationally, but knowing that to some extent we, through chair, are held responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. So the properties that we've identified are due to go to Asset and Procurement Committee in September. And in terms of not having to change planning permission, those conversations will be hopefully had at that point. I have got a property colleague with me who might be able to answer further, but the expectation is that yes, local residents will be informed.
Yes, it's not so much the planning stage as when it's actually operating, and that it is a home for some of our young people. That's what I didn't make myself clear. I apologise.
Thank you. Yes, there's the operational running of the service. If we have a successful tender appointed, it would be from April of 25. So we would do that during the mobilisation phase.
Hi, thank you for the question. Just to build on what Lucy was saying, so the option is that the tender for the company running the place, they will be dealing with the day-to-day business of the home. I think you're worrying about what would happen if there's difficulties within the local area. So they'll be dealing with the day-to-day running of that, and it will be their role to engage with local residents as well as ours. But ultimately, the children in that unit will be Cambridgeshire children. So we will also facilitate those conversations with the local districts, with the local ward councillors as well. So it will be part of that conversation throughout. Where there is difficulties or challenges, we'll keep everybody informed about what's going to happen to address those. So there will be an open form of communication across the partnership with the provider, with the local authority, and with local residents and members.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, please.
Yes, I didn't want to sound negative at all, because my experience was that we built up quite a good relationship. There was almost a friends of the home group of residents, so it wasn't meant to be at all negative. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't think it was. I think there's a lot of negativity around some of these provisions, but actually when you realise there's absolutely an awful lot of independent children's homes across Cambridgeshire, we don't hear about very many of them compared to how many there are. And I think it's the same in a lot of local authorities. So, but I agree, it's nice to have the support, but we will be there to support with issues as they arise.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I just have a systems question, and I'm sorry if I don't get the abbreviations right. The system that uses it SMR that you're using for the tendering, and we also have the DPDS. Sorry, just checking why we're not being consistent across the systems. Is that why we seem to have so many different systems? I didn't know which one, because obviously sorry.
I think I understand your question. If I haven't, then forgive me. So we use ProContract to advertise all of our services. So this will be an externally commissioned service. We have a DPS, a pseudo DPS, in place for all external placements. That went live, I think, back in 2019, something like that. And we would be calling off of one of the lots, so lot 2 within that provision. So it's already live and already available for us to call off of. Does that answer your point? You sure?
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you. Obviously, for perfectly understandable reasons, the report is written in quite an anonymised way, and I just wanted to understand whether these were properties that the council is purchasing in order to provide homes for children, and I have no problem with the principle. I think it's excellent, but I just wanted to understand, were these properties that were already in our ownership, or are we actually having to buy the houses as well?
Sure, it's a good question. So the last time this came to committee, it would have the reference would have been to externally procure properties. Since the review has been undertaken, we've got council stock in-house that we plan to utilise. So this is planned on 2 in-house properties that we would be using, as opposed to having to procure new properties.
Dr. Stone, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I just note in paragraph 3.6.1, as of March 24, the council are paying an average cost of £16,596 per child per week, which seems an eye-wateringly high sum. I note that that's reduced from October 23. I don't know how many young people that relates to are in that category. And also, is there a target for what you're hoping to achieve in terms of bringing that average cost down? Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I don't know the exact number of children that represented. So you're right, when we did the review of the average of our higher needs, not most complex, but higher needs young people that would be accessing this service. In October, it was averaged around 19,000 at that point in time. Now, at the point in March, it averaged 16,500. In answering your point of how we plan to bring that down, there'll be a cap on the weekly tendered rate. So we've met with the market quite extensively since December of last year to really underpin what the costing model might look like for that higher needs cohort of young people, and specifically bringing them out of county and into Cambridgeshire. They would be our prioritised cohort. And we identified when we spoke with the provider market, it could be anything. They wouldn't give us a pin down figure at that point, but anything between 8,000 and 12,000 a week would be probably more suitable in terms of a tendered rate. But of course, we won't know that until we've ran a full tender process. So we plan to cap the weekly fee on that basis of our market negotiations and discussions.
And that benchmarks with comparable authorities and what they're paying, because you're talking about over £800,000 a year per individual.
Martin, I think, can answer this one
Okay.
if that's easier.
Yeah, I mean, it does reflect the national position that there is a shortage of residential children's homes across the country. And certainly in region, I meet with my colleague DCSs on a regular basis, and we compare this information when we meet to make sure that we are not outliers. The work that Lucy and the commissioning team have done have really driven down some of the costs. So if we'd gone back beyond October 23, they were higher than that. So consistently over time, the costs are coming down, which is great for us. What we're also trying to do is re-engage with the local marketplace, so that provisions that are within the Cambridgeshire border. We have too many children placed outside of Cambridgeshire. That was also an added cost and makes the journey time more expensive, and it's not good for the environment with all the travelling. So there are a number of ways that we're tackling this. One is engaging with the local marketplace, making sure that places that have children's homes within Cambridgeshire think about accepting Cambridgeshire children first. That would be really good for them. They could be nearer home, and it's good for us because it'd be less travel. But also looking at this residential strategy has been a long piece of work coming, because we have 3 children's homes at the moment, which are short breaks children's homes for children with disabilities, gives them a respite break to be with their peers or outside of the home. But we don't actually have any mainstream children's homes at the moment, which this will enable us to do that. And once we're able to have our own provision, should be able to have a greater control over those costs, which first of all will bring down the average costs, but it means those children are also placed within Cambridgeshire, which is what we really want for all of our children. But there is a national issue with the exponential rise in children's homes and the shortage of places, partly due to the fact that there is a real shortage of children's welfare secure beds within the welfare estate. So if you need a child that doesn't need a criminal secure, they have a welfare secure because they're either threatening self-harm or they're a danger or risk to others. There is a waiting list of probably about 50 children a day for those beds. So there's a real national shortage. And that feeds into this, where you've got children with higher complex needs. they often need more than one member of staff, which is what drives up the cost. So you've got sometimes 2 or 3 members of staff on a shift to support a young person that might have specific difficulties. And all of those members of staff have different costs. And when you consider that there's a 24-hour rota for that staffing, you can see how it can quickly inflate this position. So hopefully this will give us a bit more stability for those children and greater control of the costs.
I've got Councillor Hay next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Quite a bit of my question has just been asked anyway, but I should say in 3.62, it does mention it's for 3 children. What I would like to know is how long have we been using unregistered placements that cost this amount of money? And could we have not gone into and looking at what we're looking at today far sooner to save all this high expense?
Yeah, so to answer your point, the latter part of your question, yes, we have. This has been, I'm relatively new still to the council, so I joined the back end of last year, but my understanding is this has been an ongoing piece of work to look at for certainly 12 months and even beyond to look at that. So it references 3 young people in the modelling on the basis that although there are 5 bed spaces available across the 2 properties, because we are focusing on a higher needs cohort of young people, we've considered occupancy rates might not always be full the whole time, and also that it sometimes is difficult to match all 5 in one go. So we're sort of taking that into consideration, and that's why the modelling talks about 3, but it's bed space available of 5. For unregistered provision, the question that you asked, so we do unfortunately have a number of unregistered providers in the area, which we're working closely with Ofsted to try and fast track, hopefully some of those that have applied for registration, but we will certainly be targeting where they're in the higher needs, not most complex cohort of young people to be moved into this provision.
Thank you. I have Councillor Daunton next, please.
Thanks for the paper and thanks for the very clear table at the beginning. Under the risks for option 2, you've set out that the service will not be as close to senior decision-making processes to preempt and or respond to a crisis. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about the relationship between the monitoring relationship between the council and the proposed external provider under this arrangement.
Yeah, of course. So the externally commissioned contracted model means that the commissioning of that and the service delivery will be led by my team. So we will lead the provider right through implementation mobilisation phases, right to the doors being opened for those young people. And then my team will closely contract manage that provider through their term.
Okay, so just give us a little bit an example of what you mean about contract managing or contact managing the team. So it is a council service in a council home, council building. So the relationship between the county council and the provider.
Sure. So there's 2 streams to this. One would be that the provider, the externally commissioned provider, will be entering into a lease for the properties that we've identified. So that will be the external provider and property colleagues. That'll be one relationship. And the other will be the relationship between the commissioned service provider, the external provider, and my team to ongoing contract manage them. So that'll be looking at them meeting their KPIs, service delivery, ensuring that the match process is working and is really key to make sure that those young people that go in the matching is right, that the service delivery is being met and managed as it should in line with the KPIs and the service specification. So that would be led on quality monitoring. All those things will all be picked up by my team.
Getting at is the mitigation of the risks, but you've answered my question.
Thank you. Councillor Boulat, please.
Thank you. I understand why from the financial perspective, option 2 makes sense now, especially in terms of the greater cost certainty. So I had a question around the risks for option 2 and then like a broader question. So on option 2, in addition to what was previously mentioned, there's a risk saying, well, tender providers may not provide the level of therapeutic care and support required for the children. So I was wondering if you can give any reassurance on that, or what that means and how high is that risk in this context. And then just looking at option 3, although I understand why option 2 makes sense in this context, especially to reduce those costs and provide that cost certainty, I guess the arguments against in-house delivery on this, on this paper and like other contexts where we're discussing the possibility or the different challenges of in-house delivery is that the council doesn't have recent experience setting up those in-house services, doesn't necessarily have the policy required. And I guess that unless we are looking into the longer term, like we'll always have those arguments, you get what I mean, because we always have, unless we start providing some in-house support, we'll always have the arguments against saying, well, we don't have the experience or the policy framework, or it would provide, to be like a higher risk option. So although I agree now in this context that this is the option we should go for, I wonder what are your thoughts in terms of longer term planning, how we can perhaps plan ahead to provide this option and not go back to the same arguments against in-house provision all over again, because unless we try in-house provision, we'll always have those. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of your therapy question, so that is modelled around the basis that because these are high needs young people, we have an in-house clinical team that work very closely with our young people and often that cohort. We work closely with our CAMS teams and the like. So we need to very carefully model that when we look at the matching for those young people and what the service delivery would look like with the service provider. So we'd need to be very careful to ensure that we're not asking them to deliver something that our in-house clinical team would be delivering or may not have capacity to deliver or can, that sort of thing. So that's the sort of therapeutic side. With regards to the in-house model, so the primary need really around moving our young people back in county, we know we've got a lot that are out of county and at higher cost, it was a time perspective. We've already got a live DPS that is set up. It gives us the flexibility to run a mini competition and get a block contract within that. So from a tendering perspective, it's ready to go. And it means that from a timeline point of view, we can do it this far quicker in that realm in terms of bringing in a service provider to deliver the service. Looking at the in-house model, there was some negatives around having to go out to market to recruit, to bring in, to get the registration ourselves. These are the things which providers generally are very geared up to do quite quickly. So it was more of a time preference than anything.
Thank you. I understand the time pressures and this, especially with the very high costs mentioned previously by councillors, it's really an urgent thing to sort out. So I do agree this, it's in a way a middle ground solution to get things moving a bit quicker, but perhaps to be interesting, not for now, but like for councillors in general to see whether in other parts of the UK there are successful models of in-house provision or not, and if yes, why those models work and so on.
Yeah. I mean, there are successful models, and there are successful models within the region of local authorities that have and run their own children's homes, and we've had a look at those too. I think it's not something that we would discount for the future. I think it's always good to have provision ourselves, and we do already with our short breaks children's homes. So we have some infrastructure there. The local authorities that I know of in the region that do this and do it well had existing management infrastructure that meant that they could use their experience to make sure that it was done A, quickly, and B with good outcomes for children. But it's not something we would discount for the future. And think with the benefit of of having this proposal in its current form, that with option 2 as the preferred option, looking at how we can develop that alongside anything in the future would not be discounted. But again, it might be appropriate that we just continue with what we've already got here. So, but you're right, it's an option to consider.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is related to what Councillor Bullock has asked, but in a slightly different way. The worst way that the public can hear about a children's home is through something dreadful that's happened and it goes into the press. And obviously, we need to make sure that does not happen in this situation. And so, but also, does that mean that the risk lies outside the council or with the external provider? Is that another way of mitigating risk? Or are we? I hope that we'd still be culpable in a way, because we're responsible, as the officer has advised us, for monitoring the service. And what I would like to be absolutely reassured about is that we as a council commissioning this external provider would be absolutely clear that we can manage and maintain the situation that's looking after our children in care. As chair of the corporate parenting subcommittee, you will understand I'm concerned about that, and that we're not going to be liable in future for something that comes back to haunt us. Thank you.
What we want to do is make this a really positive experience for children, and I know that's what you want to. So my hope would be that we have children in these homes that actually these become their long-term home, that they have a really good experience of a steady, stable staff team based, and the advantage of it being in Cambridgeshire is that we're there to give them much closer support. We can influence the services around them much more than if they're placed outside of the county, using our relationships with the ICB, with local schools and education providers to hopefully build in a lot more stability. But you're right, so they will still have an allocated social worker, they'd have an independent reviewing officer, all of the usual checks and safeguards would be there, all of the usual management oversight that supports all of our children in care would be there. And we would still retain responsibility for their well-being, no matter who is responsible for the home. We are their corporate parent, and we would want them to have a really positive experience that enables them to grow and develop and stay within Cambridgeshire. But we would be monitoring them very closely and building relationships with them, which would actually be a lot easier because they're in Cambridgeshire, so we can access them a lot more quickly.
And thank you very much, Martin. That's helpful and reassuring. And indeed, ideally, this should be exactly what you say, a much more secure arrangement for them, which would be great. I'm also slightly puzzled, no need to answer this now, but that this didn't come to corporate parenting first, but no worries. But I understand it's a financial undertaking, but the principle would have been useful to hear about at corporate parenting.
Apology, I think it's because the paper came here, but the paper came here in June last year to update, but apologies, take that, and we'll have a conversation with you outside of here about next reports.
Thank you. I think I've had everybody on my list. So we move to the vote on this item. Co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this report. We're being asked to A, agree the recommendation to externally commission the delivery of a Cambridgeshire Children in Care residential service. B, to agree the recommendation that a call-off contract will be tendered through a mini competition on Lot 2 of the Children's External Placement PDPS pseudo-dynamic purchasing system for the service. C, to agree to recommend to the Assets and Procurement Committee the use of 2 council properties to accommodate the service. And D, to delegate authority for awarding and executing a contract for the provision of the Cambridgeshire Children in Care residential service starting 2025, full date to be confirmed, and extension periods to the Executive Director of Children and Families in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People's Committee. All those in favour, please raise your hands.
Unanimous.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both. Item 6. So item 6 is commissioning a school-aged health improvement and prevention service. Raj Lakshman, consultant in public health, is here to introduce the report. Please do assume we have read it, but feel free to give us highlights should you wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just a brief summary. We have a healthy school support service currently in place across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. The contract ends in March 2025. So we need to look at what will replace that service. We've done a lot of work to look at how we replace that, and we've come up with a proposal that we commission a school-aged health improvement and prevention service, and that would expand the remit of the current Healthy Schools service. And the reasons for that are laid out in the tender. We want to be, it builds on the council's strategic ambitions for working closer to communities. So we want some bit of it to do a lot of partnership working and place-based working at place. The model is described, and we want the teams to work in surrounding the child. There's a lot of different services that we want to coordinate into this service. The second element of the service is the website, which is already well developed now, but there is this accreditation process for schools to apply and have Healthy Schools accreditation, which helps them with their Ofsted. We've discussed all of this at the School-Aged Health Improvement Partnership, which we've just set up since October last year. And we've heard head teachers say that they would like a more coordinated offer because there's lots of different services, lots of different people coming to them with different offers. They want it to be quality assured and also to fit in with the school policy. So we've responded to what the head teachers have asked at that School-Aged Health Improvement Partnership. And so we've come up with this model that is described in the paper. We've talked to procurement and legal colleagues, and it would be a competitive process under the PSR, Provider Selection Regime, which is the new regime that came into force on 1st of January this year because of the value of the contract and direct delivery of public health interventions. And I forgot to say that the third arm would be about direct delivery of public health interventions, which are health promotion, which is oral health, diet, physical activity, and reducing risk-taking behaviors in the older children, which is smoking, vaping, drug and alcohol, and sexual health. So those are the direct delivery of public health interventions. Some of the funding comes from the Healthy School Service, which is currently, some of it is coming from the repurposing of the Healthy Child Program School Nursing Service, and some of it is coming from the Stopping the Start Smoking grant that was, that's come down to public health local authorities. And the total value annual cost would be 400,000 per year, but we would review that every 2 years to look at whether we would evaluate the service. There's some evaluation in the appendix already to look at how we carry on and how we can change the model going forward so that we're responding to the needs of local communities. I can take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take Councillor Daunton first, please.
Thanks very much for the paper. There's a lot in here, isn't there? I'll just ask a very simple question first, if that's all right. So there's a sentence right towards the beginning. This has included how we can build the appropriate infrastructure to enable both a more integrated place-based approach and to bring together elements of Public Health Commission services. Just unpack for us, if you wouldn't mind, what is meant there by an integrated place-based approach in relation to this paper. Maybe just give an example that would really help us to get down to the details there. Thanks.
So I suppose in terms of integrated place-based, one of it would be we would be working with the neighborhood teams, which and we would like to bring the NHS and local authority and public health. There's a diagram in there that there's a lot of different services. There are mental health support teams in schools. There are other public health commission services like I've described there on specialist child weight management services. Then there is the drug and alcohol service for children. There's sexual health treatment services. So there's a lot of public health services as well that we commission, which are at the specialist end. But this team would be making sure that the offer is consistent. There's a single point where schools and users can go to, and so they don't have to navigate the system, but the service will do the navigation for them. If that, and then there's services that district councils provide. There's stuff that education and other parts of the local authority provide as well. And we're already going to take some pilots and starting to do some pilots, which we will again take to the next SHIP meeting and discuss that and see if those are the right pilots to do for this year. And then going forward, we'll see how to evaluate and expand them. So that's the integrated place-based bit. And I think you asked me about public health interventions.
You've explained that brilliantly. I'd just like a follow-up question, if you don't mind. So you mentioned about the accreditation, school accreditation. It's up to the schools to apply. So some schools can choose not to, can actually choose not to engage to become a healthy school?
That is right. It's not a mandated, but if you go on the website, the Healthy Schools website at the moment, there's more and more schools wanting to do the accreditation because it helps them with their Ofsted inspection as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Sharp next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got basically 3 points, I think, or 3 questions. We're talking on page 40 in terms of efficiencies in the Healthy Child Programme of 181,280. I'm getting a bit of an echo there. No. And elsewhere on that, on 5.3, it mentions about repurposing. Are we basically just using the same staff to deliver something else, or is that different staff? Do you want me to do all 3 questions, or do you want to take them one by one?
I can answer this one.
Okay, that's the first one. The second one is in terms of on page 42 on the table on page 42. It talks about if we carry on as we are, jointly commissioning with Peterborough, there are staffing and financial efficiencies. I can't see within the paper what those figures were, because that would have been useful to actually be able to look at what efficiencies the non-decoupling would give us. And thirdly, is there any one-off decoupling costs of this exercise? Thank you. Apologies for the echo. I don't know what was happening there. It was.
So the first question about staff, I think we brought a paper about the Integrated Healthy Child Programme a while in January or February to the committee about why we needed to commission an Integrated Healthy Child Programme, and that is health visiting and school nursing. It's delivered by NHS bodies, and it's quite a clinically led service. So those are different staff. This would be currently the providers, Everyone Health, who provide a lot of the lifestyle services. So it would not be the same staff delivering the service, but they would work closely. So the service specification for the Healthy Child Programme, the school nursing element, would have the same model and the need to work together in an integrated service. So this service is more like a scaffolding to bring all the different services together. The different staff would be still delivering what they are specialized to deliver in. So the school nurses would still deliver what they have to deliver, and similar with child weight management or drug and alcohol. But this service would help to coordinate all of that. The savings come from actually what we've done with the skill mix modeling in the Healthy Child Programme. So the school nursing we've done. And so rather than giving the pay inflationary pressures, we've managed to hold the budget at the baseline that it currently is. So that saving of, we had a public health grant uplift to pay for the extra NHS costs, which by providing a skill mix model, we have reduced some of those costs for the school nursing element of it. So that's where the savings come from. In terms of the decoupling costs, I think currently the cost will be that currently the website is shared. There's a single coordinator. There's a lot of partnership meetings that come together. So that would be the not monetary cost, but other that we need to consider. There isn't actually a monetary cost to decoupling, if that answers the question. I think in the Healthy Child Programme, we did have the costs of decoupling in that paper because we had a shared management structure, and a lot of the high-level staff were shared, and the specialist staff in the Healthy Child Programme, that's health visiting and school nursing. We'll get a follow-on paper about that to October committee. There's some discussions between the NHS trusts about that. So we'll get that to the next committee. That's health visiting and school nursing. This is a separate service. And I didn't remember your third question was Page 40, did you say?
I think the third question was around what the extra costs were if we carried on with them together, and then what has slightly set me off and confused, or not confused me, but was obviously back in, as you said, in January, we had a opposite situation where we actually agreed to carry on. And I'm not sure why within health we've got some bits that are we're going our separate ways, and some bits we're actually joined up.
Yeah.
It seems a bit of a messy approach, but that may be me not understanding it.
I think that's a really important question, because some things like the Healthy Child Program, which is health visiting and school nursing, which is a mandated function, which there's a clear national commissioning guidance, whether you're in Peterborough or Cambridgeshire, you get the same service. There are some things like I think both local authorities may want to shape it slightly differently. So Peterborough may want to focus on teenage pregnancies and reducing teenage pregnancies, because that's where they have more issues. We may want to, in Cambridgeshire, focus more on oral health promotion or something else. So I think it gives the flexibility of and within Cambridge as well, at place, you could decide what that area needs more. So we do the health-related behavior survey in schools. That is done by the school nursing service, but that data would be looked at to analyze what the emerging trends are in different schools to understand the needs of that local area. I think it is a issue about whether we do it with Peterborough or not, but for this particular service, we felt it would be better to do it separately, and totally get it that for the Healthy Child Program, it made more sense to do it together.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I am really concerned about vaping in young people locally, and you refer in pages 40 and 41 to the current way that's being funded and the proposed way of being funded, but and you referred to the Stopping the Start funding. What I'm really concerned about, and it's stepping back from us as a local authority, and if it's something to be taken outside the committee, then I'm very happy to do that. But I'm glad to see that there's 50,000 available from the National News Stopping the Start grant funding. But my question is, do you get any impression, given the impact we've seen of the whole business of promotion of vaping, the impact it has on children, and the problem that the disposal of these vapes has for us? And I'm also a district councillor, and we're the disposal, the collection of waste authority, and we've had fires in bin lorries. Do you get any impression that there's a move from central government to legislate against single-use vapes, their sale, and concerns with their disposal at all? And is that translated into this funding, or do we need to make a request that government looks at this more seriously and makes bigger moves against single-use vapes?
So I think in the smoke-free generation legislation, there is something about reducing the use of disposable vapes and flavored vapes, and all of that is in the legislation. This is extra grant funding money that is in addition to the legislation, which has been given by central government to public health, additional to the public health grant, specifically targeting those that are, so Stopping the Start, because we know that vapes, although they don't have the harmful effects of cigarettes, they still have nicotine and they can be very addictive. So we have to stop children whom are likely to try them and get addicted to the nicotine, to stop them. So the grant comes with certain conditions, and we have to reach the more hard to reach groups for that as well. I think the smoke-free generation legislation I think that's one of the biggest pieces of public health legislation after COVID, because that has, and the CMO was very instrumental in getting that through.
I'm concerned that any kind of activity of that type is causing an addictive behaviour. And I'm very glad that there's funding available that's targeted money, but I'm thinking there's a bigger picture here, isn't it? And I would dearly like there to be something greater against. I'm also a litter picker in my village, and it impacts us this way as well. So, but I'm more concerned about our children's lungs and our children's behaviour. So, yeah, okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Bulat, please.
Thank you. Just a comment on especially single-use vapes, because I know there was the environmental protection, the single-use vapes, the statutory instruments. I know there's some movement in Parliament on this. There was a consultation, I think, until March, but it's fair to say with the election and everything going on, I think it has been delayed a little bit, but I'm quite confident there will be some movement on that, because it's already been like drafted in terms of the regulations. My question on the paper was around the extended public health interventions, because I think it's great to have this dedicated resource on smoking cessation and the vaping, preventing that. But in terms of the extended public health interventions, so for example, on 5.3, there's a number of things being mentioned there, such as oral health, nutrition, physical health, and it says depending on opportunities and funding, and how this allows for exploring those different themes. I wonder how those issues are prioritized. Will it be up to the different schools or partners or agencies? I'm particularly concerned around like the oral health and the prevention work we can do, especially considering that I think still 1 in 5 children have obvious tooth decay. We have debated this in Adult and Health Committee and our health scrutiny function. So yeah, I guess the question is, there's so many different topics to choose from. How do we prioritize those, and how much it's up to the individual schools or organizations, and how much of a steer we have, I guess, as a county council through our public health function to be able to advise on what to prioritize in terms of the extended public health interventions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in terms of how we would prioritize, we do the health-related behavior survey. We are looking at, in one of the papers I had brought before, we have a children's outcomes framework where we look at which outcomes are getting, how we compare with national and with our comparative neighbors, and that would drive some of the work. Obviously, this, as I said, would, if we get more funding in different areas, we can have the service to direct that funding so that it's all coordinated, and some of it will come from schools as well. So we get requests from schools that this is a particular area, oral health is a particular area in one school, they want more support with that, and the service would go in and do that. Of course, from the public health, we would look at the health-related behavior survey and see if there are any patterns as well. And the Getting Ready for Change questionnaires, which is something our school nursing service does, where at every transition point, there's a questionnaire that either parents complete, if it's for reception and year 6, parents complete the questionnaires, and then older children complete it themselves at the transition point. So the school nursing service has that, and we've looked at some of the data and trends, and I can't remember exactly what, but some of the things that were coming up, we're going to address that through this service.
Thank you. Councillor Slatter, please.
Thank you for the report. It is a really complex subject, isn't it? Especially in our very complex school in landscape. I'm focusing in on 4.2 and bits of 4.3 to follow. And that is this, it seems to be, it's a big ask to try and coordinate when you've got so many different things going on. I think of my division, Trumpington, where we have 3 schools, 2 new ones, and 2 academies to deal with, who are obviously, one of them has schools elsewhere. We have one GP, so we're lucky. But there are other links And I don't see how you have place-based 5 to 19 teams able to do place-based stuff when they are dealing with, for example, schools with multi-academy trusts who may be both in and outside this county, let alone different parts. The website is clearly going to be absolutely key. And is there any chance of having some lists or a map that can actually highlight from the point of view of, say, a counsellor coming to it, a parent coming new to an area, or even a governor new to the school, just where does the school fit with the academies in its trust, with the social services and primary healthcare services, and our health promotion teams, school nurses that fit in with these, they'll be in different places. I'm not quite sure how we do it, but I really would like to feel we're going to provide as much of that sort of place-based information as possible so that people identify, well, who is the school nurse for this school? And that might not be on a website, of course, but who can I ask who the school nurse is? I've no idea for myself. And there might be some question coming up with the GPs. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are already working quite closely with the integrated neighborhood teams, which is the primary care teams who have come together as integrated neighborhood teams. In particular, special questions, in answer to your particular question about who the school nurse is, we don't really have enough funding to have a named nurse for every school. But we do have a single point of access. There's a number, and it'll be there in the Healthy Child Program paper that there is a single number that people from across the county can phone, and the appropriate school nurse would be sent or would give advice either to the school or individual parents. So the school nursing service gives individual advice on a one-to-one basis for families, parents, children. There's a universal contact number. So that's where the school or the GP would find out and know how to talk to a school nurse. But there isn't enough resource to have a named school nurse for every school, but we try to keep them. They work in teams, so they'd be working the same team with the service as a team rather than as an individual with the feeder primary schools and secondary schools. But we don't have a named nurse, but we have a single point of access.
Yes, I didn't expect there to be one particular nurse-like body one could attach to a school, but it's actually knowing where to start to find that information. And thank you for that answer to do with nurses. But it is the sort of thing that can come back from a school or be a concern, I think, particularly about sexual health and associated topics. What are the children going to be told? And if you can get a handle on what curriculum they're working to in that particular academy, then it does help. So it's knowing that there's a great deal on my Cambridgeshire maps, but I think that this website could really help to make that more secure and updated as necessary. Thank you.
I think that's everybody who had a question. So if we move to the vote, co-opted members of the committee are eligible to vote on this report, and we're being asked to commission a school-aged health improvement and prevention service, SHIPS, across Cambridgeshire in line with the emerging integrated place-based 5 to 19/25 model. This will add system capacity to the coordination of place-based services for this cohort, as well as the provision of a Healthy Schools online resource and accreditation scheme and delivery of public health interventions. And B, for Cambridgeshire County Council to initiate the procurement using competitive process under the provider selection regime for delivery of this service. The new contract would commence on the 1st of April 2025 for a duration of 2 years, with an option to extend for the further 2 + 2 years, total 6 years, subject to evaluation of the service. C, to endorse for approval by Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee the annual budget of £400,000 for the first 2 years of the contract, and D, to delegate authority to the Executive Director for Adults, Health and Commissioning to award the contract to the chosen provider and exercise the option to extend the contract after each 2-year period in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Children and Young People's Committee. All of those in favour, please.
Chair, that looks unanimous to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Raj. Thank you. Item 7. Item 7 is our finance monitoring report outturn for 22-23. No, 23-24. We've done 22-23 previously. Martin Wade, our strategic finance business partner, and Fran Cox are joining us to answer all of your questions on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, as you said, this is the outturn report for the financial year 23-24, which has just ended. It's the standard report, so I won't go into too much detail about the standard areas, and obviously you can ask any questions of clarity on that. The one bit I did want to draw particular attention to was in the covering report, we've added a new section which just highlights the summary of the year-end balance position for maintained schools. As you can see at the 31st of March 2024, the total value of those balances held by maintained schools had reduced by just over 2.5 million from the same position at the point at the same year before 31st of March 2023. Schools who have used a significant proportion of their reserves or are planning to do so during the current financial year have now been issued what we're calling an advisory notice letter, just highlighting that actually reliance on one-off reserves is not a long-term strategy for financial sustainability. In terms of that, you'll also notice in the summary table that at the end of the year, as part of the year-end returns that we collated from schools, we actually had 31 schools who ended the year in a deficit position, which is up from 16 at the end of the 22-23 financial year. And when we come on to the May report, I'll talk a little bit more about the kind of the deficit position as we move into the new financial year for those schools as well. The intention is that we're going to include schools balances information in the quarterly FMR reports for your information going forward, just so that you can see what's happening in schools, because obviously there are those increasing financial challenges which they're facing, which I'm sure many schools are coming to you with at the present time. So just on the outturn, I'll pause there and take any questions on any of those particular issues before we move on to the May position.
Thank you. Councillor Hay, please.
Thank you, Chair. I ended up having to read this report 2 or 3 times, and part of that is because of the errors in some of the tables. On page 60, in the chart Children's Education and Families non-DSG, it shows against education a budget of 46,849, an actual to year end of 38,845, which in my reckoning is roughly about 8,000 difference, but shows an outturn variance of 4679. When I look further onto page 67, the actual figure under actual year end on page 60 should read, I believe, 51,528, which on page 67 is the Director of Education total. What has actually been put in page 60 is the figure for place planning and organisation service total. So it didn't give me much confidence in one of the first tables I come across, and I find an error like that. Not only that, but on page 61, under Education and Families DSG, it shows a net budget of 112,827 with an actual year end of 129,312, which rightly shows a difference, and it's a positive difference of 16,485. But directly below that, the total expenditure DSG, net budget 113,072, actual year end 99,123. And again, it's showing a positive. Now, surely, if it's an underspend, it should show a negative as a outturn variance. And because of that, when I was reading through this, I didn't trust any of the figures, because there was other instances I came across where I just couldn't add them across.
Apologies for that. It's obviously some of the figures have obviously got transposed in when they've been copied across. What I can do is I can reissue those tables to make sure that they are correct in that and then obviously double check them in future to make sure that that is not the case. What I can say is on both of those, they're kind of the bottom line totals in terms of what we're showing in terms of the for the DSG in terms of the 14.56 million, and in terms of the 11.349 million in terms of the non-DSG elements are the correct bottom line totals in that. But I appreciate that the reading across is not accurate. So again, apologies for that.
But when you look at them, you look at all the figures, because there was other instances where I just couldn't figure out, they might add up and down, but they didn't add up across.
I do note that in some lines that is the case due to roundings. They don't add up exactly right as you go across, but yeah, I will double check and make that. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we commented on the balances really. Yeah, I mean, thank you for the report, Martin. It's very interesting, very informative. In some cases, very concerning. I think is probably the best way to describe it. Looking at those with obviously a negative balance, then that's what concerning. It's interesting, one or two have got quite substantial reserves looking at this paper. But I noticed that it's going to the schools forum in July. I mean, I don't know without sort of dictating what comes onto the agenda through the chair, but I think it's a deep dive personally looking into this in terms of what are the issues, and the issues are going to be different school by school. But I think it's something personally we should be looking at quite closely, and I'm sure you are from a professional point of view. But I think as a committee we should be concerning ourselves in this quite a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think what it already agreed is we would share that schools forum report with members of this committee. So I say within that we provide detail of school level balances and go into a little bit more detail about the deficits. But yeah, Fran, I don't know if you want to come in on the rest.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is something of great focus at officer level. And I think just conversations this week, we're intending to pull together a process of monitoring and review, and as you say, analysis of why some schools are in this position, and with a view to bring an overview paper, a deep dive, as you say, to committee, and perhaps late autumn, maybe perhaps into early 2025, just in terms of making sure that we are very, very clear about what the multiple factors are at play here. And Martin and I receive emails on a daily basis from schools outlining what those factors are. So we've got lots of anecdotal evidence, but I think it's right and proper that we do spend a bit of time understanding what is at play. Because it isn't just one thing, and if it was, I think it would be easier for collectively for us to solve. But yeah, absolutely, we will bring back that deeper dive.
I think we've put that in as an action, haven't we, Mrs. Rowe? Obviously, it comes into different places with the small schools strategy and the Education Achievement Board and Schools Forum, and also at Spokes. But we wanted to make sure it comes to this committee as well and has that oversight here. Any further comments or questions, please? Nope. This report is for noting only. I think we have noted it. So we'll move straight on to item 8, the Finance Monitoring Report for May. Martin, again, please.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously this is the first report of the new financial year, which is being presented to committee. Obviously, you can see the opening forecast is an overspend of 2.6 million on core funded activity, and that kind of builds on the pressures that we had in the previous financial year around children care placements and staffing within integrated front door as well, and continuing pressures on the DSG because of the increase in numbers of EHCPs and complexity of need that we've mentioned previously as well. Also within this report, as we do in the first financial monitoring report of the financial year, we asked CYP to endorse the roll forwards and the rephasing of some of the capital schemes, which are detailed in table 3.4 on page 113. Also, just linking back to the previous item when we were talking about school balances, obviously we are working with a number of schools who have submitted deficit budgets for 24-25 at the moment, and currently working with those to submit and develop recovery plans and the wider strategies Fran has referred to. All schools in deficit will be issued with a kind of a notice of financial concern, which is a kind of a letter setting out the conditions as part of their deficit license application. And our intention is that we'll copy in the local members to those letters so that you are fully aware of what the situation in those individual schools are, which are going out, and they will all be sent out by the end of the summer term. Those letters. Also, we'll be asking Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee to give the Executive Director for Finance and Resources approval to approve the licence deficits for those schools with deficits which are greater than 5% or £500,000, which is currently in excess of the kind of thresholds we have within our scheme for financing maintained schools. So again, just wanted to make you aware that that was also going to Strategy and Resources for discussion as well. Again, I will pause there and take any questions or comments.
Councillor Daunton, please.
Yeah, thanks. So what's the relationship between the service here, the County Council service, and individual schools in terms of training and advice for those people who are responsible for accounting in schools? Because I would be concerned that there was not enough training.
Yeah, and this is one of the things we've been talking about as part of the strategy. There is training available in terms of new head teachers, governors, and kind of finance staff within schools, but it's obviously something we need to look at. I think it's fair to say there's been quite a high level of turnover of finance staff within schools. I don't know whether kind of some of our diocese colleagues might be able to kind of comment around the kind of the challenges around that. And we have seen some kind of sort of difficulties resulting of that. I think there's also been quite a high level of turnover of head teachers as well, some quite experienced head teachers and new head teachers come in. So I think it's almost a perfect storm in terms of that. Also in the primary sector, for the first time that I can remember, and I have been here quite a long time, we're seeing a reduction in pupil numbers in a number of primary schools. In terms of that bulge is coming through into secondary, but we're actually seeing that reduction in primary schools. It's not every school, but across the county, we are seeing schools which historically have had reasonably consistent pupil numbers have seen reductions, and actually that they know because of those numbers, they're not able to reduce classes because they're still at that threshold where they need to run X number of classes, but they haven't no longer got the funding to support that. So as Fran says, it's not a case of every school has its own individual issues, and I think this is where we need to kind of work with the schools very, very closely to look at what is causing those pressures and what we can do to support them going forward, including the training that you referenced as well.
I'm really glad to hear that. I guess then the next question is, do you have the capacity to do that? I mean, do you not need somebody whose job it is to do that rather than, spread out across you and others who have plenty of other things to do?
Yeah, funny enough, we have been talking about that. And actually, I've actually got an advert out at the moment for a person on my team who's going to be effectively responsible for what we're calling kind of finance intervention within schools. So managing the school's bank account team, school's corporate team who are responsible for funding the schools and doing the monitoring, but actually having more of a focus on doing this intervention work alongside the traded team that I manage and also alongside some of the teams within the education service. So much closer links with place planning, admissions, school improvement, and SEN colleagues trying to, as Fran said, to kind of bring together that multidisciplinary team to try and support these schools, because it's quite often it's not just one thing, it's a multitude of things which is causing to this. Hence, we need to get all of the key partners involved with those conversations.
Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at your forecast, sort of outturn variance on the DSG for the coming year, what's your level of kind of confidence in that forecast? I mean, or what's your sense of what, if you were to express it as a range of potentially likely outcomes, what might we be sitting here looking at in kind of 12 months' time?
No betting on the.
I was going to say,
Yeah,
if
no
I,
insider trading,
I'd buy a
please.
lottery ticket tonight. Honestly, at this stage, we're not sure. Obviously, a big part of this is obviously we need to do the quite significant piece of work around our safety valve resubmission and reset, and I think that will massively drive where we are. So the figure in there at the moment, the 11 points of million, is based on the kind of the data that we had at the end of last financial year, and assumptions around the kind of the growth and some of the saving strategies we were putting in place. As we know, actually at the moment, the growth is probably outweighing that. So at the moment, that probably is a conservative estimate in terms of where we probably are going to end up. But until we've done that detailed piece of work, I wouldn't like to say, what level we're actually at that. Obviously, as part of that work for the safety valve resubmission, we're obviously going to have to come up with additional saving strategies to offset that, to meet the conditions of the safety valve agreement. So it's going to be all part of that, as I say, quite significant piece of work we need to do for the resubmission in the autumn.
One of the key activities, Councillor Atkins, that will support the achievement of that forecast, or certainly prevent escalation, is the delivery of the 2 special free schools that the DfE are going to deliver for us. And I think we are going to be working closely with them to make sure that they're delivered, or make sure as much as we can that they are continuing to deliver on the programmes that were set out in the original safety valve submission, because those local places for children are absolutely key, both for the children and their best outcomes, but also in relation to the cost of placement, because the alternatives, if they are not delivered within the timescales that the DfE have set out, are that we would be having to place those children in more expensive, high cost, out of county placements. So that's something that the moving parts are not only within the council sphere, they are outside as well.
Thank you. Just to clarify that I've understood correctly. So your estimate of 11.7 million then is your kind of central estimate based on the information and data that you have now, but the committee should understand that there is kind of risk potentially beyond that. That's not even perhaps a worst case scenario. Would that be a kind of a fair layman's summary of what you've just said?
Yeah, I think so. Based on the data that we have at the moment, as I say, and based on the continuing increases in complexity of need we're seeing coming through, yeah, I think that's a safe assumption at this stage.
Thank you.
Standing item on our risk register, I think. Councillor Sharp, please.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions really. And looking at the two that two of those that we've certainly got pressures on, children in care placements with so far a forecast overspend of 3 million. And the other one is the home to school transport, which is obviously we know is and I know when we were in the budget setting round, I was asking questions back in January and February. And if I look at home to school transport, we're obviously looking at the procurement period going into the autumn term, but it was felt that there were solutions, or is probably the wrong word, but there was work going on to try and reduce those costs. I just wonder whether any of that has been effective or is it still sort of early days?
It has. So you'll remember that in November 2022, I think we brought the Transport Transformation Strategy to committee, which you endorsed, and there was a number of things there in terms of savings strategies, we are now 18 months into that programme, and there has been significant savings made. I think the word significant is in context of the increasing demand and inflation pressures that the transport budgets face. Very similar situation to the children in care placements budget and the DSG. The reality of the transport budgets is the numbers of children that we are transporting with SEND continue to grow, and we're also seeing that the cost of delivery from the provider market, the inflation is not coming down to the same extent that it might be coming down nationally. So whilst the saving strategies are working, and we are within this budget round, as you would expect, considering again, what else can we consider to do? We're working with other local authorities that are in very similar positions, particularly the big rural local authorities, and seeking advice and support around other strategies. We're doing everything we can to bring further proposals back to committee in the autumn and into next budget setting in the new year. So whilst we are making good progress, I do caveat that in that the demand and inflation continue to grow, and they are things that we cannot affect in the same way in terms of the reality is we've got 12,000 routes every day, and that will continue to grow whilst Cambridgeshire continues to grow.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. Again, we're asked to note the performance information and act as necessary. No, we're not. Yes, we are. No, we're being asked to note the report and B, to endorse the proposed capital budget movements reflecting the annual roll forward and rephasing process as set out in section 3.1, subject to the agreement of Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. Would all of those in favour of the recommendation please raise their hands?
That looks unanimous.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Item 9. Item 9 is the quarterly performance report for quarter 4 of 2023-24, and Martin Perbrick, our Executive Director for Children, Education and Families, will introduce this one. Thank you, Martin.
I'm actually going to pass over to Liz. Sorry.
Thank you, Liz.
Apologies for playing with the microphone. Good afternoon. I'm Liz Clark. I'm the Service Director for Quality Assurance and Practice Improvement for Children's Services. And in terms of, I know that you've had this kind of paper in your pack in terms of the performance report, which relates to quarter 4 of 23-24, which is January the 1st to March the 31st of this year. Clearly, you can see for each of the indicators, there is a RAG rating, there is an indication of direction of travel in terms of performance, and there is a narrative kind of set for each indicator. Obviously, there's a range of those which relate to children and social care and those that relate to education. So obviously, Fran is here in terms of those education questions. So you can appreciate that, you know, we do have some that are red in terms of children's social care. We certainly have some that are performing well. I don't know whether at this point I would stop and say in relation to the children's social care indicators, particularly that's 1, 2, 3, 116, 117 and 118. If anybody had any specific questions, I'd be happy to address those to you.
Thank you. Questions, comments, discussion points? I'm seeing none.
I might hand over to Fran then.
Fran.
Yeah, very happy to take any questions in relation to the education and SEND performance indicators. I think as an overarching kind of summary of quarter 4, there wasn't a significant change in terms of the patterns and trends that we're seeing across education. I think committee are very well versed in the challenges, and the performance absolutely reflects the challenges that we know that we face within the education sector, and it also reflects the strengths that we know that we have as well. So yeah, very happy to take questions on particular elements.
No? Councillor Sharp, please.
I'm presuming I'm asking the questions on the right one. I wasn't sure. I've got 3 basically. Indicators 130, 131 and 133. Are those what you were just talking about, Fran?
I'm scanning down the report,
Yeah.
Councillor Sharp, to find the ones. 130. Yes, got them.
130 is key stage 2, reading, writing, maths. Again, I'm getting an extra. Obviously the target is 65, which seems it seems above the let me get 65, which seems above. We're actually not doing badly against our local neighbours and against the mean, but obviously we've got a stretch target, I suppose, for want of a better word. Is the question really is, and it's probably similar to 131. Is the sample too small that movements of 3 or 4% are just statistical? Therefore, they're not going to really be a deep underlining thing. And the final question, I'll do them all, is indicator 133. We've only got figures for up to 21, 22. this is on permanent percentage suspensions. We've got nothing for, or sorry, on the Cambridgeshire line, that is, yeah. Those are my three questions. Thanks.
So yeah, in relation to indicator 130 and 131, you're absolutely right that we're doing okay. Reading particularly remains a national focus and a local focus, and I think the aspirational target of 65% is to make sure that there is no complacency. And I think the sample that we have, or a large local authority, is good. So every percent increase means a significant number of children who are reading at or above national average, which is really important. And I think that I'm happy with the aspirational targets in that it just focuses both our staff that are supporting our schools to be able to provide targeted interventions, particularly around reading. In terms of the suspensions, there is a lag in the DFE data that comes back to the local authority. Since the days of academisation, the local authority doesn't hold the same central role around data in the same way. And so academies do not have to report in the same way that they do, that maintained schools do. So there is always a lag with suspensions. On indicator 133, though, I would note that it is likely that this is an indicator, and we're already seeing it in terms of permanent exclusion, that will decline over the next, it already has this year and it will continue to. So just in terms of the live position, we've had 18 permanent exclusions this year in Cambridgeshire in secondary schools, and I believe 14 in primary schools, which is a significant uptake compared to previous years. And that just really reflects the complexity of young people that are in school at the moment, and it is very much aligned with mainstream schools on a journey of how to include those children in their mainstream schools. So that is absolutely something that we are aware of. It's not yet reflected in the data because of the lag in terms of the DFE reporting, but it's subject to closer focus within the new inclusion transformation programme, which I'm sure will come to committee in due time in terms of the targeted and focused work around exclusions and suspensions.
Thank you. Dr. Stone, please.
Thank you. Just a question really about the way that targets are set in relation to Ofsted outcomes. That good or outstanding is a very, very wide category. And good in particular is a really wide category. And there's some concern that good, obviously it ranges from schools that have almost achieved outstanding to schools that have scraped their good. But is there any focus on the proportion of schools that are outstanding and where that sits now across the county?
Absolutely. I think you're right, absolutely right to reference that even the kind of the rating, as we know, has been subject to a lot of focus and may or may not change in the next year, 6 months, depending on on what happens in the next month. So I think from a school support and improvement point of view, the council is very, very much focused on targeting its support and provision to enable schools to be better. Now that might be an RI into good, it might be good into outstanding, and I think that focus of the limited resource we do have in the right places has seen this year some really, really good improvements. Whether or not that's yet reflected in an Ofsted grade or will be reflected in an Ofsted grade, I think whilst Ofsted is absolutely an important regulatory body, and we are working within a system that Ofsted is present and schools are aware of that, I think the relationship that the school improvement team have built with the maintained schools is one of support and intervention with a view to enable progress, both and one really significant shift actually in the last 2 years is, even though perhaps inclusion, as we've already referenced, isn't yet recognised as perhaps it might be within an Ofsted framework, that is absolutely part of the targeted focus and intervention that the schools have, and the schools support structure that's in place is very multidisciplinary. Similarly, as we talked around the finance aspect, it's the same for any element of school performance. It's extremely multidisciplinary, so it's not just thinking about reading in isolation. It's thinking about reading alongside finance, alongside inclusion. So I hope that answers your question. I think I agree with you in terms of the kind of the binary nature of both Ofsted outcomes, but also the way we report on them. I think we report on them in this way because that's the system that we're working with, but the practice on the ground is far more nuanced in terms of how we support schools.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Daunton next, please.
I want to pick up on something that Councillor Sharp mentioned earlier in relation to 131. And I think that we have talked about this in the past before in a previous reports. The commentary, I think, leads me to think that we accept that there's further work to be done, but I think that was what we were saying some time ago. And I do remember that the then Director of Education had been addressing heads at a conference exactly on this topic, that we have a range of secondary schools where, is it fair to say that there's underperformance? And I don't know what we can do. I mean, we're in an academisation situation, and what can the County Council do in that situation to shift this from amber to green?
I think you're right to note there we are in a position in Cambridgeshire where all of our secondary schools are academies, and therefore the role of the local authority to intervene or to do some targeted intervention around performance in this way is not as it would be in our primary sector, where we have maintained schools that we have a responsibility to support. I think the culture of Cambridgeshire for as long as I've been here is, regardless of what type of school you are, whilst our statutory duties may be different, there's a moral obligation to make sure as a partnership we're doing all we can to improve for children, because children don't care if they go to an academy or a maintained school. So that being said, the mechanisms that we do have are through the head teachers forums, are through the CEO forums, and are one of strategic challenge and strategic support when there are issues. So, for example, I and the AD for school improvement, who is just left us, Carly, last week, have been regularly meeting with the CEOs of the big multi-academy trusts, many of whom run our secondary schools in Cambridgeshire. And in that forum, we meet them half-termly, and in that forum, that's where we would raise concerns around a number of issues, not just around performance and outcomes, but around a number of issues. And we're building that, whilst we don't have any powers to intervene, we're building that relationship so that there is that opportunity to have these conversations. I think alongside that, it's the continual offer of support around anything that they might need to enable them to improve. We are fortunate that our secondary schools are run in the main by, large, well-resourced multi-academy trusts that do have the ability to enforce improvement. And we have seen examples of Ofsted gradings improving within our secondary schools, within our MATs. So we know that there is that relationship there. I think moving through into the next year with the new Director of Education joining us, I know it will be her priority to maintain that relationship and to build those support structures so that we can, with whatever we are able to as a local authority, make sure that we do have some influence on Indicator 131, being very mindful that as an academy they are able to say no, but we don't have that situation here in the main. We do have really good relationships, and we are working in partnership.
So I think one of the things that you've just said is that you've talked about the well-resourced academy. So it's less to do with finance, it's less to do with financial resources, must be to do with something else, and whether you have any influence over what that something else is. Obviously, that something else is different at different schools, but it's rather surprising to see this, the sense that there is still further work to do, because I think that's what we were saying 1 or 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the England average, this is not just a Cambridgeshire issue in terms of secondary performance, and I think we are sitting above that, which is good. And I think it's just making sure that, just like with Indicator 130, we are not just complacent, and that we are striving to improve. I think you're right. The issues surrounding performance in each school and each of our secondary schools are nuanced to that school, and there isn't again one issue why the performance wouldn't be at the target that we've set. But I think it's continuing to have those relationships and have those honest and frank conversations, and we have seen really good outcomes from that approach this year, so we can just hope that that would continue.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to turn briefly, if we can, to the indicator on persistent absences. This is indicator 132. I just wondered if you might take the opportunity just to perhaps sort of update the commentary a little, which I think focuses on how for a number of years performance may have been sort of, well, almost certainly was adversely impacted by the pandemic, by the lockdowns, families shielding and all of those measures. I think what concerns me here is that I think for academic year 22-23, I would have expected those to have been quite firmly in the rearview mirror, and yet, persistent absences are still being shown at nearly the same level as they were the year before. So clearly, there's been a long tail following on from the pandemic. So I don't know if you have any reflections on, well, I guess firstly the more recent, whether we're seeing this continue into the kind of most recent academic years, and what is now driving those persistent absences.
Absolutely, subject very close to my heart. I think you're absolutely right. I think post-COVID now there should be really no physical medical reason why the pandemic is driving persistent absenteeism. What we are absolutely seeing though is a delayed impact, not wholly to do with COVID, I'm sure, but certainly it's impacted by COVID on children's resilience and children's mental health, which is then driving persistent absenteeism. I think that's quite a blanket statement. I think it's it continues to be quite an unmapped piece of what we're seeing. It's very early stages still, but there is definitely continues to be an impact of the pandemic on children's attendance at school. This is linked directly with the significant uptake in the trend in SEMH EHCPs that we've seen far beyond what we expected, to that extent that SEMH requests for EHCPs are now overtaken that of autism, which hasn't been the case in years. And I think if you speak to schools, they are very, very much concerned with what is happening in terms of children's mental health and how that's impacting on them. And that might not look like them not being able to come to school significantly for a long period of time. It might look like the attendance is variable. It might look like the children are getting into the school building but not able to engage in lessons. So as I say, it's quite a complicated picture. But I think the issue with attendance, persistent absenteeism is to remain with us for some time. Emotional based school avoidance is very, very much more understood now, and we're able to target support around that. Schools are also able to target support around that, and there are some really good examples of very inclusive schools that are able to get young people into their schools regardless of their levels of anxiety. But it's absolutely still, and you can see that in the data, as you say, absolutely, one would expect that to have dropped back down again, but it's not. I think just lastly on attendance, there's the new arrangements that come into play from September where so that's one reason in terms of genuine mental illness is impacting on absenteeism. I think the other aspect is term time holidays, where not necessarily directly linked to persistent absenteeism, but we do know that there is change in legislation from September around that, where families are allowed to take their children for 5 days rather than 3 days without meeting that threshold for a fixed penalty notice. And schools again have fed back that they're already seeing an uptake in requests for term time holidays off the back of that. So that's concerning, and that's something that we'll be tracking and monitoring as well. So an interesting times for attendance moving into the next academic year.
Thank you. Do you think there would be any value in providing kind of different or a range of indicators here. I'm slightly worried that this, I mean, I expect that 10% has perhaps long been held as the definition of persistent absence, and that's why we've got it, and that's why we've got good comparators. But it strikes me in this new context that could be covering a multitude of different, you know, I mean, so 10% would be a day, a fortnight. That probably has some educational effect, but some of those kids might not have attended school all year. And to lump them all in together in this context, I wonder if we need to see, you know, number of children who are absent 20% or more, or whether we need to start kind of segmenting this a little more.
I completely agree. I think it's very nuanced now. There's not, I think at one point, the children within that cohort that we might be looking at were probably quite a similar cohort. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think we can absolutely take that away and think about, you know, there is a number of data sets that we've got around the why. There's new coding coming in from September as well in terms of how schools code absence, including codes around alternative provision and things that aren't there. So we can absolutely take that away and consider whether there might be something more useful to committee in terms of how we report on attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I wanted to go back to indicator 2, which is the number of children. It's on page 124 of our pack. And it's the number of children with a child protection plan for every 10,000 of population. So often I come to this sort of KPI and I'm concerned that they're not measured for a unit population. They're just their numbers. So this one does, which I'm glad to see. But I just wondered if you could give us any narrative around why you think that number is increasing since last winter, because obviously populations are increasing in the county. But why should there be more children attracting a child protection plan now than last winter? You know, why is it going up? Is it that the trigger point has changed, or is it that suddenly we've got a whole load of children with a whole load of new problems? And this does not reflect back into COVID, you know, because those numbers were high during, you know, 2020, 21. But obviously they've dropped down, or is it our intervention level is changing? I'm just slightly uncertain as to why we've had this quite significant increase between October 2023 and March 24.
I think that one's mine. Apologies. Sorry, I've been quiet for a minute. So as you'd expect, we do track this really closely in terms of the kind of narrative. It's important to kind of say for Cambridgeshire that we're not out of step in terms of what's happening nationally or in the Eastern region. And I think the data does tell you that we still have a lower kind of rate of children per 10,000 subject to child protection plans in this in Cambridgeshire than England or our kind of statistical neighbours. And that's a kind of similar sort of picture for the Eastern region. So when I sort of say we track it really carefully, because actually all of those questions you've asked in terms of what might be kind of going on are things that are interrogated around the kind of data and the hypotheses. So as you'd expect, and I apologise to committee that I didn't stress, I was remiss in not stressing when I talked about our indicators about the overall kind of picture of performance management and performance monitoring that takes place for children's social care. As you'd expect, we have very rigorous all service performance monitoring groups where we track an awful lot of data. We have qualitative and kind of sort of practice quality based kind of sort of boards and groups. And we also have in-service performance monitoring sort of systems. So when we look particularly at kind of child protection, I mean, there are a range of things that kind of interplay and integrate together. So as you said quite rightly, we wouldn't expect to see things in the same perspective that we saw for kind of COVID during kind of lockdown, during those kind of sort of periods. What we have seen nationally, though, is the kind of impact of a kind of changing landscape of what's happened to our children and young people post-COVID, which is one factor. What we have seen in terms of
the ability, when to go back to what Fran said around, increased kind of complexity and need, for schools and for universal services. We know there are challenges for some of what we would talk about the early intervention work of universal services in terms of what they're able to to do. So one of the factors that may see the increase in kind of children coming through is what can be offered at earlier stages. It's not saying we don't have early intervention, far from it, but it's saying when you start to look at kind of the interplay of complexity and kind of need that's happening both nationally and both kind of in Cambridgeshire, we haven't changed the kind of threshold. We have reviewed the threshold document that was done through the multi-agency, through the partnership at the end of last year. We do kind of quite often understand sometimes going back to kind of what other services can deliver, sometimes the expectations of partner agencies around what they're able to do, when they're able to do it, and what they would like us as children's social care to kind of come and sort of support with. And I think that, the overall sort of kind of picture, I've been a qualified social worker for 27 years, and I think I would definitely say that what we see coming through our doors in terms of kind of need and complexity has developed and changed kind of over time. We do quality assure and look at, we've got scrutiny points around where before children become subject to a child protection plan. So as you'd expect, there's an exercise around the kind of strategy discussions. There's an exercise around looking at when we make children subject to a Section 47 investigation, which is when we have identified that a child is suffering or likely to suffer significant harm. And we're making a single agency social care or a joint with police investigation into that, usually kind of rolling through to a recommendation for an initial child protection conference. But there are kind of scrutiny and oversight and management positions across that. We have an independent chair system in terms of, so when children become subject to a child protection plan, that's a decision that's kind of done by the multi-agency, but also with an independent kind of function to look at kind of the information we've got. So we test ourselves consistently. Are we confident that children are being managed at the right level and the right threshold? We also do substantive bits of quality assurance work to understand children's journeys. So we have seen an increase, and we've seen a further kind of increase in children subject to child protection plans in the most recent. This is obviously data that kind of is from Q4, but clearly we're tracking kind of, as you'd expect, the most recent information. So we are looking, as I sort of talked about before, about really understanding children's journeys. What services have they been subject to? What have been the kind of different points of intervention by different services? And we take those findings and pieces of work back to the multi-agency quality and effectiveness group. So there is a subgroup of the Children's Safeguarding Partnership, which looks at kind of quality and effectiveness. We're part of the System Quality Assurance Health group, and we bring kind of information about our findings from there too. There's quite a lot to say on this. I apologise. I'll stop.
Absolutely. But absolutely, it's right that our monitoring is concentrated on the children. But this is about care protection orders, which relates to the people who are looking after them. And so this increase relates to an increase in problems in the carers or parents of the children, doesn't it? And I'm just wondering, what are we doing or do we have any understanding of what's going on for the parents and carers? And obviously the integrated approach is looking at that, but maybe what's happening is something that's making life more difficult or more unbearable for the parents rather than the children. The children are just the victims of it, aren't they? So we don't need to sort of necessarily elucidate that now, but I'm just thinking, absolutely, it's right and proper that we concentrate on the children, but the people causing the problem, which is causing the children to need to have a protection order, is whoever's looking after them.
I mean, you're very right to make the point in terms of whilst it is the child who's subject to child protection plan, it is the child's plan. The child and family assessment and the work is about the whole context for that child and the holistic assessment, which includes kind of what's happening, obviously, in terms of both within and outside of the home. And that's a really important point. I think in terms of, again, there's sort of some of the complexity of the interplay of factors in a post-COVID landscape, in an austerity landscape, in a landscape of sort of challenges for kind of services. Then we also know that in terms of the access to services for adults, the pressures on adults and the kind of needs of our kind of, our parenting population, that is part of the assessment. And as you'd expect within a plan, there will be supports and activities around those parents, but the way it's phrased in a plan is, so what's the impact of on the child? So there will be things that are designed to kind of look at and support those adults to be effective parents who can appropriately safeguard and bring up their children in the way that we would hope. But it's phrased in a way that makes us kind of focus on what does this do to improve the outcomes for the child.
Also, just want to add to that. It was around you can see the increase growing from sort of October, November time last year, and that's when we launched our Big Six practice priorities. So, really focusing on the basics of our core social work practice. So, genograms, chronologies, hearing the voice of the child, making sure our visits are meaningful, improving and increasing our management oversight, and making sure our plans and planning is more effective. And I think those things have also contributed to the increase as we get to know our children better. We've had more consistent management oversight over that period of time, as well as we've had more permanent managers in those teams. So I think all those things have combined to show that we actually have a better understanding of the needs of the children, or a better understanding of the risks they face, which has led to an increase in those plans, keeping them safe.
So that's the other point which I was thinking about. Does this mean that we're actually protecting our children better than we were before? Because we recognise there's a risk, and so we're giving them a protection plan, maybe in a more, because our management has been more focused.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head with that one. Yeah, absolutely. And Ofsted also found that whilst not all children need a child protection plan, have a good experience, many do, and that the multi-agency partnership around those children works really well together. So I think you're absolutely right. It probably means that whilst there's an increase in plans, it means that we're supporting the right children more now than we were.
That the indicator is red, so it looks like it's bad. So absolutely, I remember years ago when I first joined the corporate parenting subcommittee, and the legal advisor said to me, "We've never regretted taking a child into care, but we're more likely to regret not taking a child into care." And so this is an indicator that perhaps we are protecting children better. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and the balance is always tricky.
It's always difficult to have a target measurement for children subject to child protection plans. The target that we've got set ourselves, I asked the question earlier today about when was that target set and who set it, because it is incredibly tight. When you look at what the national and neighbourhood average is for us, it's a very low number of plans that we'll be expecting to have, and I think that's historically been the case for some part of Cambridgeshire's history. I think we're probably getting the right children now, so I wonder if we need to have a look at that over the next year. Just keep an eye on it, and then maybe review what we think is the right target, because I agree with you, red for this number seems a little bit harsh when actually we're feeling like we're getting the right children onto the right plans. I agree with you.
Is it a county target, or is it a national target?
It's a local one. Yeah, it's not a national one.
I think that's everybody who indicated they wanted to speak. Not seeing any hands. We've been asked to note the performance information and act as necessary, so no vote is required on this item. I'm going to propose that we take a 6-minute break and come back at 4 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We're on to item 10. So item 10 is the Children's Social Care Customer Service Annual Report 2023-24, and Liz Clark, our Service Director for Quality Assurance and Practice, is still here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I know that the individual team manager, she sits within my area of the service, so I am presenting the report on behalf of that team, because I would like to say that I can't claim any credit for the beautiful presentation of the report and all the infographics and the way it's been put together, which I think is a really helpful way of demonstrating the work. Oh, apologies. Sorry, is that better? So I'm very conscious I sound kind of quite loud. So, okay. So in terms of this is the annual report, has been said, for the Children's Complaints and Feedback Team. So obviously that covers April 23 to March 24. I would like to draw your attention, particularly within the report, to the case studies at the back. I think there are 4 quite detailed case studies, which I think really bring to life some of the complexities and the detail of the work. As you'd appreciate, there is a section on page 8 about the compliments. I know quite a lot of the report focuses on the complaints and sort of feedback when people have not been as happy as where things have gone, but there is we do receive a significant number of compliments, and we do keep all of those, and obviously those are just some examples. Clearly, this report is not a standalone, piece of work, in the sense of it is the annual report. However, we are very clear around with kind of particularly about looking at complaints and feedback. It's not only about the effective management and processing of that work, but it's about how quality our response is, and also very much focusing on how we turn this into a so what. What's the learning? What's the stuff we need to change and develop kind of in the service? What does this kind of tell us around what we're doing, well, but also where we need to improve? So when we're looking at practice improvement, this report is a really important part of the work we do through our Practice Quality Governance Board and through our performance monitoring kind of meetings. I would like to say, obviously, you've got it covers the whole kind of system and the service delivery kind of piece. And just to kind of go through some of the kind of highlights, I know that you have had the report. So overall, in terms of there has been a decrease in stage 1 complaints in relation to children's social care in 23-24 in relation to the previous year. So that says it's 3.14% of the overall total, down on last year's total of 5.27. We have seen an increase, though, in complaints overall, and that has a number of those obviously relate to the statutory assessment team, which is in relation to kind of EHCP kind of work. And there is a particular sort of almost deep dive section into the report to give you a kind of sort of flavour around that. I would like to highlight the kind of context for us as a local authority, that since 2018, we have seen the number of children with EHCPs more than double. So, and there is a table within the report which gives you an indication of actually how many children in Cambridgeshire have an EHCP. So as a proportion of children, we always kind of consider, that against the kind of context in terms of the number of complaints. The report gives you obviously the 3 most common themes around kind of sort of upheld and partially upheld complaints, which relate to delays, plans and communication. And I think in terms of that's broken down into that 31% of upheld and partially upheld related to difficulties with communication. In terms of plans, that was 24%. And obviously we have looked at some of the specifics in the detail in relation to the statutory assessment team complaints and what was kind of coming through as the themes from there. Of particular note, in terms of stage 1, we did have, of the 454 stage 1 complaints, 33 were made by young people and 26 were assisted by an advocate. And again, it's important to stress that the advocacy services that we commission, those issue-based advocacy services, do include the ability to support children and young people with complaints and to support them through the whole process, not just simply to help them kind of sort of complete a form. And we have been doing some additional work recently in how we advertise and how we use QR codes to enable kind of children to see and hear more readily. We've been consulting with kind of children around the best kind of way of advertising that. So we are very keen to kind of make sure that that remains something where we are actively seeking how children can make effective kind of complaints. There is a section in the report, obviously, which talks about, as I've said, about the kind of particular kind of learning, talks about the structures for kind of learning, but there are examples in the report around things from complaints that concluded in the year 23-24, which had led to specific service improvements. And I think that was really nice to kind of sort of highlight those particularly. For example, you know, we have reviewed and updated and uploaded to the council's website the no recourse to public funds policy. There is information for parents about educational placement consultations have been added to the local offer, and the local authority's education placement consultation letter has been amended to ensure schools make a robust response so discussions take place when they feel the school feels it can't meet need. So those are just some examples. There is quite a lot of data in the report. I will pause because I appreciate there may be some specific questions.
Thank you. And yes, there is a lot of data in there, but it's really good that the lived experience comes across, and having those case studies really explains to us all how the process goes through. Comments and questions, please, committee. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you very much for the report and for the detail that you've put into the report. It does help us to understand. And out of the, you said initially on page 157, and you've mentioned it yourself, that out of the 454 stage 1 complaints, 33 were made by young people, and of which 26 were assisted by an advocate. But that means the remainder, over 400, came from parents and carers, I assume. Because it doesn't say who the remainder came from. And I appreciate a large proportion of those related to SEND assessments. But I'm just wondering, you've analysed it since, and that's good, and that you've said that the partially upheld and upheld were most commonly relating to delays, plans and communication. And I'm just wondering, what steps have we taken to try to ensure that we respond promptly and we communicate appropriately? And because I think those are the two things that we can do. So perhaps you could clarify on that, please.
Thank you. So I'll clarify the point about who makes the complaints first. It is parents or carers, or children, young people directly, or those where parents or carers have given specific consent for somebody to complain on their behalf. So we do kind of have a number of those. However, complaints or concerns by professionals or other agencies are managed through a different kind of route, and there is a kind of policy on managing professional differences, as you'd expect, and there is an escalation kind of route around that. So those are not situated kind of within this. So this is predominantly about those people, service users, people experiencing delivery of the service and their kind of view of that. In terms of absolutely really helpful question around the steps taken, So there's a couple of things. So in terms of any individual stage 1 response, or stage 2 response, there are actions kind of recommended by the person who has investigated the complaint. And those actions are turned into a very comprehensive tracker, which this team kind of sort of sends out a weekly kind of report to kind of chase and update and kind of sort of look at what's happening with individual actions. So those actions might relate to the specific complaint. They might also be smart actions that relate to something for a team or for an area of the service. And those aspects are things that we particularly pick up then through Practice Quality Governance Board, through the participation strategic group, because we're very interested in things that are then obviously themed to an area or to a team. So one of the things since I've come into post that I'd agreed with the manager for this part of the service is that we would do some service specific complaint reports this year. So there is a quarterly report, and then Q4 is the annual report. What we've looked at is, rather than some of the very data heavy quarter 1, Q2 reports, is that we would kind of make them a little bit more streamlined, but then do kind of 4 service area reports throughout the year. Because for me, as you've absolutely kind of highlighted, so what does this mean? What does it mean for not only the individual in terms of their direct service, but what does it mean in terms of what have we learned as areas of the service, as teams? What could we do sort of differently in a more kind of sort of strategic kind of fashion?
I think my question was related to, obviously, if everything was hunky-dory, we wouldn't have a complaint. So it's not after the complaint, it's what are we doing to address the way we communicate with parents and carers in order not to receive complaints? How do we make it more timely, and how do we give them the information that they need, about all the stuff that we're doing, so that we don't generate, they're not prompted to generate a complaint. It's how our approach to communication with parents and carers be, as business as usual, to ensure that we don't get complaints. I think that's my question.
I think Martin's going to come in there, but I can come in afterwards. Oh, I can go. Okay. I was going to say, apologies if my answer wasn't perhaps clear enough initially. That absolutely agree with you. So not only does the learning from the upheld complaints feed into what we need to kind of do differently, we do have obviously a very large focus. Martin's already talked about kind of sort of the big 6 in terms of areas of practice. We have got a revised kind of practice approaches and models kind of document. And I think as a senior leadership team, we are very, very clear about the relational based approaches to working with kind of sort of children and their families. We're very clear around the importance of kind of how we communicate at the earlier stages, how we communicate in a way that is systemic and understands kind of what, where that position for that family kind of is. And one of the things that we've done a lot of work on recently is around how we understand the reasonable adjustments needed for not only children, but also their kind of parents and carers, and how we put those kind of front and center in our case summaries, in our work. So that means that as people kind of, have different people perhaps working with them, that everybody understands what people need in terms of the best way to communicate with them. So it's quite a detailed piece that kind of sits underneath.
Briefly, it might mean if you're not there when somebody rings, to call them back, and responding to an email promptly, those sorts of things. It might be the real basic stuff.
I agree. But it's also things where reasonable adjustments, it's the font size that we send emails in. It's the numbers we ring people on. It's not ringing people on a withhold number. It's all of those kind of detail around good and respectful communication and treating people with dignity at all times and at all stages.
Liz has covered most of what I was going to say, but thankfully, but I was going to go back to the statutory assessment team in particular, because I think that's where Liz was saying like the biggest rise has been in complaints, which actually tracks alongside the increase in demand that we're seeing from there. So no surprise, you get double the amount of people needing an assessment, you're probably going to get a similar amount of complaints. But that's too glib for my, like I said, we are doing a lot of work looking at our statutory assessment team processes to make sure that we can try and reduce the number of complaints that we get, so that we can do those assessments more quickly and make sure that children have a plan in place in a more timely way, so that we can hopefully reduce the number of complaints that we get from that team too. They're a really passionate team that really want to make sure that all of our children get the right educational plan. So we're supporting them with a bit of additional capacity to look at that process. So hopefully we'll see that reduce over time as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Hello, thank you for the report. It was quite sad to read it all, to be honest. I think my question is really about, obviously you can see the growing rolling average over time of the EHCPs. And also I have a lot of parents that I speak to locally that haven't been able for their children to acquire an EHCP. So I wondered, do you capture who has applied? Do you catch the data who has applied and has not been given an EHCP? Do you also look at private? A lot of parents are now going private locally that I'm speaking to. So I wondered if you captured that data to understand kind of what's going on, not just, what is current, but what is going on in the background that we're not able to help or in any way. So thank you.
I may slightly defer to another colleague on that, because I think in terms of this data particularly reflects to people's experience, in terms of complaints. The question you're asking obviously about where need perhaps hasn't, what the delivery hasn't met what people would hope for, is collected and thought about somewhere else. So I'm going to go to Martin, if that's okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We capture all of that data. So we know who's made a request for an assessment, who's had an assessment, who ends up with an education and healthcare plan at the end of it, who doesn't, and how we can support those people, even when they don't have a plan, to get additional support if they need it without having a plan. So we track all of that. And I do know that members get contacts from parents where they haven't been able to get a plan or they haven't had their needs assessment in time. And there's a well-trodden pathway for parents to follow when they're not happy about that process, and that pathway is there to support them to make sure they can make representations on behalf of their children. That's the right thing to do. But that reflects exactly what I was talking about in my previous answer about reviewing our statutory assessment team processes, so that we can support the team to make sure that they can get the assessments done in a more timely way. So there is a lot of work going on to hopefully reduce that frustration for parents over the next 6 to 12 months. Yeah.
So thank you for that. So just to understand also that, do you get any learnings from schools locally on the ground of what they're kind of dealing with, as well as,
Yeah, we engage with head teachers and SENCOs throughout the year at various points. On an operational basis, on an operational basis, that's on a daily basis. We speak to them, and they're part of the assessments as well. But there's the SENCO conference, which I've been to. There are a safeguarding conference, which I've been to. There's Cambridge's primary heads later this week, which I'll be at as well. So we get a lot of feedback, and we meet with them regularly. They're also the cluster heads group, so that we engage really deeply with our head teacher cohort and with our SENCOs.
Any further comments, questions? Not seeing any hands. In which case we are asked to consider the content of this report and appendix and request a further report in 12 months' time. Assuming everybody's happy with that. Marvellous. Thank you, Liz. The final item on today's agenda is item 11, the committee agenda plan, training plan, committee appointments and local authority school governor appointments. Do we have any changes to the agenda plan, Mrs. Rowe?
None that I'm aware of.
Any comments on the committee training plan? Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, can I just highlight that some of us work full time, so some of the training comes in at very actually doesn't give you much notice firstly, and also comes in timing where we can't take time. So I felt like I have been to a lot of training because of that. So thank you.
I am aware of that, and we do try and vary the times and dates, but Mrs. Rowe.
This applies to all member training, not just specifically to this committee. It's very difficult, obviously, to arrange it. If we do arrange it in sort of the evening, we clash with people going to parish council meetings. So what we try to do is hold the majority of it during the lunch hour and make it an hour, in the hope that those that do work can actually come in their lunch for that. But for some training, I'm sure that's not possible. So we do apologise, but it's very difficult to meet the needs of every member.
Thank you. So turning to committee appointments to outside bodies and advisory groups and panels, existing appointees are shown for review and we have no vacancies needing to be filled. Any comments, anyone? Nope, lovely. Next, we come to the appointment of chair and vice chair for the corporate parenting subcommittee. I'd like to propose Councillor Bradnam as chair. Do I have a seconder?
Happy second.
Thank you. Do we have any other nominations today? Nope. In which case, thank you very much for all of the work you do in that position, Councillor Bradnam. And Vice Chair, I'd like to propose Councillor Slatter for Vice Chair. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you.
Councillor Bradnam.
Any other nominations for that one? No. Thank you very much to Councillor Slatter.
Thank you very much.
And finally, we're asked to note the local authority school governor appointments made between January and March this year. As always, I'd like to put on record my thanks and the committee's thanks for all of our school governors for the incredible work that they do in supporting our schools. Which brings us to the end of today's business. We will next meet on Tuesday, the 10th of September. That was originally a reserved date, but we will be using that date. And I declare this meeting closed. Thank you, everyone.